when you look at who's really suffered from these 15 years of Democrat one-party rule, it's the poorest, the most vulnerable, working people, working class families who've just been crushed. 35% of Californians cannot afford to meet their basic needs. First Jerry Brown, but especially Gavin Newsom, doing nothing to hold back the tide of far-left insanity on every single issue.
Steve Hilton, an Englishman running for governor of California. It's a really interesting story. Before I go any further, please hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching, whether it's Spotify or YouTube. Just hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And we have these great guests, and it doesn't cost you a thing. So just click subscribe. Thank you for that. Steve Hilton has written a book called Califailure. He's been living in California for a while. We'll get into why, how he came from England to California, and how now he's he is deep in the throes of campaigning for governor of California. How might that go over? What hurdles is he facing? What's his message? You've seen him on Fox, I'm sure. He used to work at 10 Downing. He is a really fascinating guy. Steve Hilton, our guest now. All right, Steve, I'm not going to sound like a big fan here, but I am a fan of yours. And I'm thrilled that you are in the state of my birth, where my parents were both grew up, where I grew up, and that you're trying to make a difference. Great to meet you.
It's wonderful to see. I feel, those of us who are in the media, we do events and we meet people. And I did an event in Napa last night. I'm on the road all the time in California. And it's lovely because people come up to you and they say, oh, I feel I know you. You're my friend, because they get to know us through the media. And I feel the same way about you. We've never met in person, but I really, really am so happy to be with you today. And I feel like we're friends.
Likewise. I want you to save my state. But I want to give people a little bit of background on you first, because obviously by your accent, you're English. Where were you born?
So I want to take one step further back. I was born in the UK, in London, that's right. But I think of first of all, I'm an American now, so no doubt about that. I just want everyone to be clear. Yes, I still have the accent. I'm working on the accent. Don't
lose the accent. It's an asset.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. There are certain words I've discovered that, when you say them in an English accent, they sound a little kind of hoity-toity, and you got to really go full American. We'll get to that in a second. But the point I wanted to make, so everyone really understands, because if you want to know me and my roots, actually my parents are both Hungarian and my stepfather is Hungarian. The whole family is Hungarian. Pretty much all my family still lives in Hungary. And the more that I reflect, and in doing this, making this journey, and obviously I've had to reflect on that because people ask me, but I've had to talk about this in a way I haven't before. And actually the Hungarian roots are really a big part of my makeup in terms of my life, but also my political philosophy, everything, because my parents left Hungary. They fled communism. It was a communist regime, and they escaped and got to England, and that's how I had the opportunity to be born in a free country. So the Hungarian thing is very important.
That's fascinating. It amazes me how many people I talk to that have fled communism, whether it was from China or in your case, Hungary, that you have an appreciation for America that other people maybe take for granted, that everything that's afforded us here.
Right.
So why did you want so badly to become an American?
So that was a process, a journey, really. So we moved here in 2012, almost exactly. It was around this time of year, April, May. And it was something that was not necessarily a permanent move. It was actually to do with, I would say, our family sanity, if I could put it like that. I was at the time working in 10 Downing Street in London. I was senior advisor to the Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron. And my wife at the time, well, she's still my wife. My wife was then working. She had a big job at Google, actually. She was global head of communications for Google. But because of my job in the UK, she was traveling a lot, obviously to California, where Google's headquartered, and doing lots of, video conferences and so on. But the time difference, 8 hours, was pretty big. And when our second son was born, it was just a real, there was a lot. It was a lot. The time difference, she often wouldn't get home till late. And, it just felt like for our family, we needed to make a change. So we moved to California in 2012 without really thinking this is for good. We just like see how it goes. And I, now I wasn't working in 10 Downing Street. I taught at Stanford and I started a business and did all of that. But it wasn't until I actually really remember the moment. It was 2016. It was 4 years into living here. And I went back to the UK to get involved in the Brexit campaign. Do you remember Brexit? It was the same year as the Trump revolution here. And it was the first sign of that kind of populist uprising. And I felt very strongly about Brexit. I was in favor of it. Went back to do that. So I was away for a couple of weeks. And then I got back. I remember so clearly landing at San Francisco airport and just looking out the window and just thinking, oh, it's so great to be home. And I just thought, oh, that's so interesting, home, and really that's what started. I just thought, this is home. And not just literally like where we're raising our family and I've started a business and whatever, but, emotionally, actually, really deeply, I really feel California. I don't want to get over the top, but kind of spiritually, actually, I feel really connected to California, the idea of California, what it represents for me, the sort of best things it should represent, not what we have now, but, innovation and energy and hustle and the rebel spirit, that kind of, we're going to do what we think, all of that. That is California and that is me. And so I just love California. And so then I thought, and I went down this path of, then I should just, if we're going to stay here, then, okay, I need to become an American, which was an amazing moment.
It's really, really interesting that you talk about California in those terms. That's the California that I grew up in. My dad was in the aerospace industry. My mom was a teacher. There was innovation all around. Hollywood was still in its glamorous stage and its sort of golden era, although we were starting in on the Jane Fonda years and all of that activism and so forth. But California is really, in many ways, strayed from that. And I wonder if you can talk about what you've seen of the state since you moved there. It's still one of the most beautiful spots in the world. Geographically, you talk about having been in Napa, stunning. And the drive from Napa back to San Francisco, stunning. And you can't help but appreciate that. However, I can never forgive Gavin Newsom for what he's allowed to happen to California. How have you seen it change since you've moved there?
By the way, that's a very, very appropriate word, what he's allowed to happen. I'll get to that in a second. But even since we've been here, and I talk to people obviously all the time, I've been really working towards this moment of running for governor, really the last two plus years. Not necessarily having decided to do that, but I've been really engaging in a way, going back to what I was doing in the government, policy and how do we make change happen. So I set up a policy organization called Golden Together, and I've been traveling the state for the last 2+ years, meeting people, doing events and so on. And it's really interesting. Everyone says the same thing, that it's barely recognizable from and it's all it is the timeline that you've just described. It's the last, 10 years or so. Even when we moved here, you didn't really, yes, there were problems, but you didn't, not like this. And the contrast is so great. You're right. So we were in Napa last night before we're taping this. I'm actually speaking to you now from Los Angeles. And it's almost I said at my event last night, it's like the perfect contrast. We're out literally in a vineyard with the hills, the golden suns. It was amazing. I said, okay, tomorrow morning, I said, I've got a very important podcast taping. And then after that, guess where I'm going? And I said to them, what is the opposite of this in California, basically in Los Angeles? I'm going to Skid Row to see, I'll be there in an hour or so. And this is just the utter calamity. It's the way that the people, the thing that really upsets me is it's 15 years now of one party rule, 15 years. Where they've had uninterrupted power at every level, every branch of state government. And these are the people who never stop lecturing us about social justice and compassion and equity and all these things. When you look at who's really suffered from these 15 years of Democrat one-party rule. It's the poorest, the most vulnerable, working people, working class families who've just been crushed. I mean, yesterday, new data came out. It's a survey that's done every 2 years. And the number, and it measures not just poverty, but the way people struggle to live and afford things. 35% of Californians cannot afford to meet their basic needs: rent, food, medical care. And that number's gone up in the last 2 years. And you think, there's no shame on the part of these Democrats. This is the direct result of their policies. It doesn't have to be like this. It wasn't always like this. This is the direct result of what they have done. And the final point I'd make is when you said what Gavin Newsom has allowed to happen is very important and very much connected to the job that I'm now campaigning for. Because a lot of the bad stuff that has caused these problems has come out of the state legislature. And of course, we don't often report as much on the state legislatures as on the governor. It's easier to focus on the person at the top. But what you've had is first Jerry Brown, but especially Gavin Newsom, doing nothing to hold back the tide of far left insanity on every single issue. He's done nothing. He's literally just stood there while the state's been destroyed by policies coming out of the legislature. Occasionally he's added to it and made it worse, but it's this passivity, this total failure to stop this far left nonsense that's crushing families, crushing businesses, making it impossible to do anything here. The taxes, the regulations, letting people just die on the streets. It's just appalling.
Appalling is the appropriate term. I mean, it's just they think that it's empathetic to continue to give a drug addict more drugs. Like, let's have a needles program. Let's have a program where it's okay to be homeless. Here's a tent, because we know you can't afford our cities. I wonder how much, I still have many friends there in a variety of political, on the spectrum all over the place. After the fires in the Palisades and Altadena, you got this sense that they were going to hold Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass accountable. But nothing has happened in that regard. There's been no recall effort for either. I don't see a lot of progress happening in either of those communities in terms of cleanup and rebuilding. So is the opening there real for you? Do you think, the momentum is with you?
Yes, but I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I say this all the time. It's not like suddenly everyone's going to wake up and say, what have we been doing? Voting Democrat. Now, obviously, we need change. And big majorities in California on all the polls for years now have been, however the question's phrased, is the state's going in the wrong direction, need a new direction, etc. So, 50, 60% on those numbers. And recently, in the last couple of months, you've had, I think it's 3 polls saying nearly 48%, 47%, 49% would vote for a Republican governor. So, things are changing, but that's just a poll, right? On the fires, first thing I want to say is actually I was involved in a recall effort for Karen Bass with Nicole Shanahan. So Nicole Shanahan was Bobby Kennedy's running mate, fantastic. Got to know her in the last few months, and we both felt that that actually, if we can really bring this moment of accountability for this absolute catastrophic failure, and the fires really captured what's been going wrong, this terrible combination of ideology and incompetence. That's really because on the ideological front, the reason the fires were so bad was because of the climate extremism and the environmental the ideological, for years, policies that stopped the clearing of brush, the protection of those areas and managing those areas in a sensible way. You had bureaucracies fining residents for clearing the brush from their own property, trying to protect, literally fining them. And you had
insane.
Right. And you have the California Air Resources Board, 25 years ago, this is really a very decisive factor, published a new air quality management, policy that stopped controlled burns in the area. So that's the ideology. And then, of course, the total incompetence. We don't need to go into that. But Nicole and I felt, and Nicole really was leading on this, said, look, if we can bring accountability now, when it's such an egregious failure, then that's a really good first step in bringing change to California. If we can show that we can beat the Democrat machine now, that's a really good first step. And so that we did launch that and got going on that. But it was really the rug was, taken from under that because the obvious candidate to replace her is Rick Caruso.
Right.
In Los Angeles. And he came out against the recall. And really,
I didn't know that, Steve. Why did he do that?
We don't know. I'll tell you what he said to Nicole. He said, I don't want to be accused of attacking a black woman.
Oh.
I mean, that's literally what he said. There's speculation that he is thinking about running for governor and he doesn't want a vacancy in mayor of LA because then he'd have to do that and then he can't run for governor. In other words, totally self-serving. Whatever. So we did try for a few months to get that going. But to your broader question, I mean, there's a couple of indicators that things are changing. In the elections last year, 10 counties out of 58, so that's a high proportion, including some big ones like Fresno County, Fresno is the 5th biggest city in California, flipped from blue to red. Huntington Beach, where I launched my campaign, that was a city 4 years ago, it was run 6-1 by Democrats. 2 and a bit years ago, a friend of mine, Tony Strickland, he's now the co-chair of my campaign, put together a slate of candidates. They called themselves the Fab Four. They won. So they took control, 4-3. They immediately started doing common sense things, clearing homeless encampments, prosecuting crime, getting the extreme nonsense out of the school libraries, that kind of thing. And then just now in November, they put together a slate of 7 candidates, very relevant number because they called themselves the Magnificent Seven. They weren't running away from Trump. That's another thing you hear. You can't, Trump's a disaster in California. They called themselves the Magnificent Seven. And they all won. So it's gone from 6-1 Democrat to 7-0 Republican in 4 years.
Yes.
And it was just rated best run city in California. So the ingredients are there. You look at the Latino vote across the country in the Trump revolution, this massive realignment of working class voters and Latino voters, Hispanic voters moving to the Republican Party away from the Democrats. That has happened a little bit in California, but there's a massive opportunity there. If you look at the number of votes that President Trump got in California in November, that is more than enough votes to elect a Republican governor in 2026 because there's a lower turnout. So if everyone who voted for President Trump votes for me, I will be the governor. So that's something you can work on in terms of turnout and getting people to the polls. So I think it's possible, but it's going to be very difficult.
Very difficult. How do you appeal to Californians at the top? Like, your top line message to Californians, given all what's going on, is what?
Well, the theme of my campaign is golden again. Let's make California golden again. And everyone kind of gets that on an emotional level. We want our state to be what it should be and what it was. And everyone has a slightly different memory of that, but people get it. But specifically, the focus of my campaign is positive, practical things to help people. And so it's great jobs, great homes, great kids. Those are the 3 sort of things that I focus on. And it's about, for example, the number one thing I talk about is because we got to relieve the financial pressure. 35% of people can't meet their needs. We have the highest rate of poverty in the country. Last year, for most of last year, we had the highest rate of unemployment in the country. Now we're like 2 or 3 or something. I mean, it's just a disaster. And so people can't afford to live here. We have the highest cost for gas, electricity, housing, rent, everything. Most expensive in the country. And so number one is we got to help people who are struggling. So my tax plan, which we've worked out, remember, I'm a policy guy. We've done the work on this, is your first $100,000, which doesn't get you very far in California because it's so expensive, tax-free. And then above 100K, a flat rate of 7.5%, including for capital gains, because we've got to attract back the entrepreneurs and the business leaders who are going to create the wealth. So that's really at the heart of it. It's dealing with this affordability crisis. that the Democrats have. We've got to build more houses. We've got to end this insane bureaucracy that makes it impossible to run a business. I ran businesses, including restaurants. Yesterday, one of the reasons I was in Napa, I spoke to the California Restaurant Owners Association. They are being crushed. I mean, the environmental regulations, the labor regulations, the lawsuits, the permitting, the fees. It's insane what's going on. It's like, and every industry you look at is just being assaulted by the government. I was in Fresno last week in the Central Valley, our great agriculture industry, the most fertile farmland in the world. And they're taking away the water. They're taking away, they're piling on labor regulations. They can't afford to pick the crops. I mean, it's just everywhere you look, it's extreme, ideological. I coined I found myself saying a word which I kind of made up, which is nut jobbery. I don't know if that's a word. I'm sort of deciding they're not. It's like none of it makes sense. Can I?
No.
I know I don't want to go on and on, but can I give you one example of just the insanity? So we have oil and gas reserves in California, like plentiful oil and gas. There are no oil pipelines coming into California. So whatever we use, we either have to drill for it here or ship it in. So going back a few decades, most of the oil and gas we used in California came from California, from Kern County, around Bakersfield.
Right.
Now it's flipped. 80% is imported because of their war on fossil fuels. And so they're crushing the industry, but we're not using much less. I mean, it's gone down by, I don't know, 7% or something. What are we doing? We're shipping it in on giant super tankers, the most polluting form of transportation on the planet, spewing out carbon emissions from countries. Our number one source of oil right now, Iraq, with absolutely terrible human rights and environmental records. This is what they're doing in the name of climate. It's insane.
Right. It is insane, and it's tragic. Education is a big one there. Here's one. My mom was a public school teacher her entire career in California, raised through the public schools. She raised us in public schools. She taught at public schools, but the teachers unions are fierce in California. And I remember during COVID, I think it was the LA County school districts or the teachers unions were not just demanding that, if we're going to come back into the classroom, we've got to wear masks. Okay, now we want plexiglass. Oh, and by the way, we want climate justice. Oh, and by the way, we want social justice. And by the way, we want, it was like, what does this have to do with your job? So this is not just a teachers union. It's an activist group that makes it very, very difficult. And they continue to fund Democrats. How big of a hurdle is that for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for pointing that out. And that's exactly right. I mean, on top of everything you said, their list of demands for reopening in LA, as you said, included Medicare for all, a wealth tax. I mean, just, they're activists. And funnily enough, I did an event. It was the last day of the first week, so in Sacramento on Friday. I went to Sacramento. I stood outside the state capitol to make the point that actually we're fighting this machine. It's not just the Democrat politicians and the candidates they put up. I called it the Democrat industrial complex because it's the machine politicians who've been there forever, the unions who fund them, the activists who give them the ideological instructions, and then the bureaucrats who implement it all. It's all of that together. It's this big, and they've had it all their own way for 15 years. Specifically on the teacher unions, I mean, by the way, the total amount of money spent by the government unions in California, not just the teacher unions, but all of them together, every year on political activity, $1 billion. Billion with a B. I mean, and of course that's all our money because it's all coming from taxpayer salaries and the dues that they take. Anyway, I think there's no substitute. I think one way that Republicans may have, I think they may not have taken this on strongly. If they've been a little bit, cowed by the unions. I mean, you even see in Sacramento, Republican legislators. It happened this week in committee voting for legislation to please unions because they get donations from them. It's not just a Democrat problem. It's really bad.
Sure.
And so you've just got to go for it. You've got to just point out what's going on. I mean, these teacher unions that constantly lecture us about everything. Look at the results in the schools. I'm so glad you brought it up. And that's the third plank of what I'm arguing when I say great kids, which is
Yeah.
we have under half of California students today meet basic standards in English. For math, it's 33%.
Oh,
Two-thirds don't meet basic standards. And you just think those numbers should be 100%.
yeah,
Like parents with
absolutely.
kids in private schools wouldn't accept those numbers. Why should we accept it in the public schools? So I'm just being
Absolutely.
very direct about it. We're going to have a grade for every school, a grade for every teacher, so we can reward the good ones and remove the bad ones. And by the way, we've got to take, in California, this is an amazing fact. Public school teachers have tenure after 16 months. Tenure. Like tenure was designed
16 months?
but why do they have tenure at all? I mean, this was supposed to
Right.
be for professors at universities to preserve academic freedom. How is it that we have it for public school teachers after 16 months? You can't fire them, basically. That's why you have these
Yeah.
places with, just these teachers that they haven't fired. They just sort of sit around all day. They take them out of the schools when it's really egregious. But I mean, it's just, we got to take it on directly and just make the
Yeah.
argument and not be afraid of them.
Absolutely. That's essential. Not be afraid of them. I think so often in the past we've seen Republicans sort of cow when the criticism comes at them, or I know you're not going to do that. I have great faith. Before I let you go, what are some of those words that you think your
Oh,
accent might make you sound hoity-toity and you should
yes.
become
Well,
more
I'd make a joke
Americanized?
about it. We talked about it a little bit. Actually, there's two highly relevant ones. One is a word I say all the time, um, but it's a big issue, particularly in the Central Valley, but also connected to the fires. Is water. So you say water. It's a little, you got to say because, and also I published a policy report at my organization, Golden Together, on water abundance. It just sounds a bit where you go, water. We need water for California for our farmers.
You almost sound New York there when
I
you
know.
do it
Well, I
that
don't know.
way.
It's just, but the other one I've got to tell you the story. It's very funny. We went to because I'm a huge supporter of our, just common sense, our oil and gas industry, right? As long as we are using oil and gas, let's use the oil and gas we have here. So Bakersfield is known as the kind of energy center, but actually, really, it's a town a little bit northwest of Bakersfield, smaller place, but that's the real heart of it. And I did an event there. And I was in the front rows in an old movie theater. I was sitting next to the mayor of this town, and he introduced me, and I went to speak. And even as I said it, I realized, no, you got to be English doesn't work for this. The town, I will spell it for you. It is Taft. And I was up there and said, it's so great to be here with you all in Taft. And Taft. Taft.
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, when in Rome, you got to speak the language, I guess,
Exactly.
particularly when you're pronouncing names of cities. But it is great to finally talk to you and meet you. I am going to be watching with great interest. This is the place I grew up. I still have a lot of family there, and I care. But at the rate it's been going, I would never come back. If you were the governor, I might come back.
Well, that's my whole reason for doing this, Michelle, to win you back. That's the
Yeah,
whole
right.
point.
Well, I wish you great success, and maybe there's hope for California. It should be golden again. It's golden for a reason, and no one should feel bad about that or guilty for that and think that, we're so lucky here in California. Maybe if we just let homeless people be, we'll feel a little bit better about ourselves because then we're not as beautiful and great as we. I really do feel like that's part of their
Yes,
calculus, that
it
if
is.
they let some of this stuff just go, then they don't have to feel like, oh, we're the perfect state and we're better than everyone else. It's no longer competitive. It's what's Gad Saad calls suicidal empathy.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
just brutal. Steve, great to meet you. All the
Wonderful.
best.
Thank
Governor
you so
Hilton
much,
sounds
Michelle.
really good. Governor Steve Hilton. I like that. I say this at the end of every podcast: be brave, do good. That's what Steve Hilton's doing. We've showed you all the places, and it's in the show notes how you can go help his campaign. So we will see you next time. Hey, you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.